Hi, welcome to Artist and Critic. My name's Don Gray. Tonight we have with us the painter Lambro Ahals, L-A-M-B-R-O-A-H-L-A-S. And as you can see here in a self-portrait, Lambro Ahals has recently had an exhibition at the Roco Gallery in New York City. He has been living in Greece for the past 4 years, and indeed lived in Greece from 1962, I believe, to 1965. He is an artist of really sincere, honest, first-rate accomplishments. And Lambro, I'd like to begin by asking you, what has been the response of New York City to your exhibition at the Roco Gallery?
The response of New York City?
Yeah, or the critics. Have you received notices and so forth of your show?
The critics have ignored me, in a word. But this doesn't seem to be anything unusual today. It seems to be rather the rule. And as a matter of fact, many very well-known artists don't seem to be getting any attention, which is, to say the least, sad.
Why do you think that has happened? What's responsible for artists of reputation and artists who are not as well known? Why aren't they covered, do you think?
I think it's a very complicated thing, and it's been probably building up for many years. I don't know what to say, except that it's
is it a question of just too many artists, or do you feel that critics these days will not travel a little bit to see a realist?
Frankly, I think that it's not something that's an accident. I think that it's just a carrying on of a very bad scene. The criticism was always, I think, limited to a few, and now it's more limited. I don't know what the reason is, but perhaps the critics don't want to commit themselves as much as they used to. Perhaps there's not enough interest from a commercial standpoint. I mean, from the point of view of the newspaper. Perhaps the newspaper doesn't think criticism of paintings is that important.
Well, they, as you say, they don't seem to be covering it as much, and I'm wondering, the works that they do seem to cover, and one thinks really of the Times, I guess, is one of the few papers, and of course there's the Voice and the Soho News and so forth, but they do seem to spend more time on abstractionist, modernist, or formalist works, if you want to call them that, and they seem to spend less space on realist painters. And I just don't know if the fact that abstraction has been in command, so to speak, for so many years, and they are still worshiping at that god, so to speak, or...
I think they're all confused, frankly. I have a personal point of view, and I may or may not be close to the truth, but it seems to me that a lot of critics are just backing off into their corner because they don't want to commit themselves except when they feel like it. And this century has shown a lot of, there's a chaotic kind of condition that's constant with art, and it's getting worse and more confusing. And recently there was, I don't know how long ago, perhaps a year or two, there was an interesting book by Tom Wolfe published. And it was interesting because it was kind of an expose. The
Painted Word.
The Painted Word, yes. I got word of this book while I was in Greece, and I thought that after reading what it was about, and then after a bit I got a hold of the book, I read it, I thought this would somehow bring about some kind of change, because in fact it's what is said in the book is pretty close to the truth, I think. And it's something that all serious artists have known for years, and here was a person who was not an artist coming out and naming names and situations, and he was obviously upset. I think the most significant fact about this book is that it is now forgotten,
Yeah.
and that the people who should have been affected don't seem to care. I mean, the public. The public who has, the people who have been going to museums for years and wondering, as Tom Wolfe wondered, what it was all about, you know, these paintings that they couldn't understand, the various schools that have come and gone, as you know. Some, they come and they go. And here he lays it right out for everyone to see. And somehow the book has been pushed aside. I don't know how, but you know, there are ways, I think. Perhaps there are all kinds of conspiracies involved.
Wolfe was talking about the fact that we were just lost in a morass of endless theorizing and words, and talking about pictures had actually replaced looking at pictures, and almost in a sense. And he was talking about what stripe painters and splash painters and how little they had to say really about what art was and what the human spirit is.
What really got him started was the statement that Hilton Kramer. It's interesting that he names names, you know, and I'm sure there were many people embarrassed by this book. Maybe that's why it's no longer in a limelight. I don't know how it went as a seller, but Hilton Kramer stated that realist painting is fine, you know, it has its good points. There are certain good painters, evidently, in his estimation, who paint realistically, but it has no theory behind it that's valid. And without a valid theory, what can it possibly mean? Which is all nonsense.
Exactly. The fact of words replacing pictures.
Which brings around the subject of the critic, which is, in the case of Hilton Kramer, he's almost like a god. And he has this tremendous power, which is, I think, bad for art.
It's the tremendous power which shapes opinion and so forth. Do you feel that, I've lost the track of my thought. What I'm trying to say is that, do you feel that ours is such a technological society and has become so impersonal that it almost seems as if the critics and the museum curators celebrate this impersonality, and they admire and write about an art that is impersonal, that has very little emotional quality to it? And as we go very close soon to your pictures, we're going to see that you are probing reality, you're responding to life and its color and its vibrancy and so forth. Do you feel that there's a critical bias toward impersonal art?
I certainly think there's a critical bias. I think that that there is, I don't like to use the word, but I can't think of a better one. There's a kind of a conspiracy that's been going on for years. The critic, the gallery director, I mean certain gallery directors, the museum directors, and the artists who are together to produce something, a product that's saleable. And we have created today stock market kind of pictures, which are much more valuable than other paintings that are also, I mean, more valuable than works by artists who are well known, but not stock market painters, quotes.
Right.
Because these are created values. And I think that these pictures are produced because they want I mean, it's produced in a kind of a conspiracy. What else can I say? It's a conspiracy.
It almost seems, really, I've reached the point that I've begun to feel that people are almost afraid to look around them, almost afraid to feel something. There's some spirit current in the modern world that has dulled us, has frightened us, has turned us away from the world. And so we spend the empty hours amusing ourselves in the studios and in the museums talking about Michelangelo's, you know, and figuratively talking about art, and it just has no connection with anything meaningful or profound.
Well, I think that's true. I think that without knowing it, the contemporary art scene has just degenerated to a point where it doesn't seem to have any, it doesn't have a consequence. I mean, I don't know, I keep thinking of another language. It doesn't, for instance, from the time of the cave paintings, prehistoric art, many centuries ago, we've had a tradition until suddenly, about 50 years ago, it started to be cut off. And it doesn't seem to me logical that, that it should be, because people aren't suddenly like this in one century different than they were for 25 centuries.
Exactly.
Or more than 25 centuries.
Exactly.
So why should now this technological age
dislocate us so as it
change art so much? Art, quotes. You go to a museum and there are these paintings. Do we have much time? Am I talking?
Yeah, go ahead. And then we'll look at your.
Today we have these paintings are put across the ones that I said were involved in the conspiracy. There has to be a gimmick. You can't follow one of these artists. For instance, there's an artist that everyone knows who has made himself famous by producing very large paintings which are in essence blown-up comic strips. Now, if you follow this artist with your own comic strip kind of painting, you are what? Nothing. He can get 100,000 and you won't get anything. You won't even get you won't get into a gallery to show your work. But if you were a follower of a great tradition in painting and you were a good painter, I mean, it's one thing to talk about a master of painting and another thing to talk about a blown-up comic strip.
Exactly.
What relationship is there between them?
Right.
I don't see any at all. And there are innumerable gimmicks. Size. If you take a painting that has kind of a hazy, kind of indefinite composition and kind of color that doesn't really, is also indefinite, but somehow the technique is unusual, and you make it 10 feet by 5 feet, it impresses you in size. It doesn't impress me, but it impresses many people. If you take that painting and reduce it to 8 by 10, what have you? You have nothing, you have a blob. But if you take, on the other hand, a painting, it's absurd to compare this to a master like Van Eyck, for instance, whereas this is the opposite is true of Van Eyck. You take 1 square inch of Van Eyck, and you have a whole world.
Exactly.
A whole world in a square inch. And you can take the square inch and blow it up, and you will see something.
Magnificently rich.
His own world, his soul.
Exactly.
So it's absurd to compare Van Eyck and the work of a comic strip on the grand scale.
Well, I think we've become involved with superficialities in our own time, and certainly Lambro Ahals, painter of realistic still lives, landscapes, and figures, is trying to deal and succeeding in dealing with an art of substance. As we go to look at the works of Lambro Ahals, I wonder, could we turn the monitor on over there? And would you please turn it on as you focus after you focus on the picture? What were you aiming for in this picture, Lambro?
I just wanted to paint a very good painting, and that's it. I worked on it for a long period of time, and it was changed innumerable times. I mean, drastically, and there are nuances in it, and color and tone that you certainly cannot see here, nor the paint quality.
I'm going to have to move here. I'd really like that monitor turned on. If somebody would turn it on, just pull out the volume. Are you making any comment about the art of the past, in a sense? These obviously are the pictures on the studio wall that you admire.
This happens to have a classic theme. And I just got together some paintings that the subject matter of those paintings come from various periods of art. One is a Picasso, one is a several Greek sculptures, and I like to repeat this theme for no other reason than it's beautiful to look at. and I think it kind of
we'll move to the other
Proof.
while the camera's on this here. Who is this young
That's
man?
a young friend in Athens who's a very nice young woman and a serious girl with a beautiful face, and I just sat her down and painted her as she was. She sat like that, and there she is. It looks quite a bit like her. My paintings don't always end up being portraits, but this happens to look just like her.
As Raphael Sawyer has described in the brochure of your show, he wrote a very complimentary and I think a very accurate description of your work, and it is very, very rich in color. It's not bright color, it's rich color, and the substance of the paint is extremely tactile and beautifully handled. We'll just move on to the next one. Here's another beauty.
Well, that's another girl. This picture I worked on for a longer period of time, which is really doesn't mean anything except that it takes me long. I work harder. The result is what counts. The one before I did relatively easily. This one took me a long time, and I think part of it is due to the fact that the model wasn't available so much, and also it's a more complicated composition.
Yeah.
It's a larger painting and more complicated.
Do you, what are your work habits? Do you find yourself working sketchily on some paintings and then working to a great degree of, now I don't want to say finish, but completion, searching out the character of shapes and forms and so forth?
Well, I don't have any real
I'm not saying a formula, but I
a
mean,
way of
is there
working. It's
rhythm
always a
that-
little, no, I just keep probing and pushing my paintings. I destroy a lot. The first painting of the still life that was shown was, it went through a long metamorphosis. You would be surprised how much it's changed. This one didn't change so much. I take, for instance,
Would you like to keep this one here to talk
well,
about?
no, that's all right. No, this one I didn't change much.
Okay.
This is
Here we go to a landscape.
this is an entrance to a harbor in the island of Hydra, and it's very simply done. It's a small painting, and I've simplified the forms and changed reality, which is, I think, what you must do if you're a realist painter. You don't paint everything as you see it. This place does not look like that. It has many more white houses, which didn't work out too well.
Yeah.
And the tonality of the picture is very subdued and much changed from reality. Although I think the end result is realistic, which proves the point that you can renew traditional, so-called traditional art by just painting it your way.
Exactly, and when we talk about abstraction and saying that in many instances it's limited because it probes so little, that nevertheless, even in realistic painting especially, there is an abstract basis to a picture. There's a solid framework upon
Yes.
which the significant realist bases his images, I think.
Yes, in the case of this, I think I've simplified reality to a great degree,
Yeah, very much.
and I have on the point of the harbor there, I have achieved a rather sculpturesque, I think, form.
Definitely.
Very simplified. In reality, it wasn't
Yeah.
like this.
I think this particular picture brings to mind, and perhaps the figure beforehand, that Sawyer's statement, in the one aspect of Sawyer's statement, saying that there was sometimes a feeling of Corot in some of your pictures. Would you agree to that?
Yes, I have been influenced by Corot.
And just the simple monumental solidity of the forms.
I think, yes, and the atmosphere of the picture is sometimes Corot-like, but he's a good person to be influenced
Wouldn't
by.
you say so? Definitely.
This painting is more expressive, and I think I'm influenced in it by the sitter, who is a person who has problems, and I've known for many, many years. And I think the anxiety of the individual is expressed.
Yeah.
Of course, my own anxiety is in the picture too. That also is what makes art. And we don't need gimmicks. We just have to interpret in our own way things. And if we have enough talent and a personality, then you have created art. It's as simple as that. I think the new personalities are what make art. Because your themes can be very limited, and each person will interpret it his way,
Exactly.
even if he has been influenced by the same school of painting.
I think all we ask of a talented artist is an honest response. You know, if it's honest and searching, then there's just no question that some meaningful work is going to come out here.
The last couple of pictures were not done quickly either. They were worked on. That's why many of my paintings have a paint quality that it has a lot of pigment on. It doesn't really show too much in the final.
Well,
The pictures are not full of bumps, but that's because I keep scraping them. But there is a surface that means something. There's a texture on the surface that's important in my work.
It's not swishy or slick by any stretch. Whoops, I'm sorry. By any stretch of the imagination, it is obviously worked, and, and they are sumptuous surfaces, very expressive.
I work very hard on that.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
This happens to be charcoal pencil drawing with a little sanguine in it, and it's of Edwin Dickinson, who was very important in the history of American art, I think.
Is he still living?
Yes, he spends a lot of time in Greece with his wife, who adores Greece, and we've become friends, and I did this portrait of him.
Well, I think you've really gotten the character of an old man, haven't you? You read the twisted hand on the cane and the...
Yes, I think it's very much like him, and he's a spunky little man, a very strong personality, and a great artist. This is again the same girl who she has problems. And I think that this painting shows it as well.
There's sort of a sense of isolation, really, isn't there, the way you have her placed against
Well,
that?
my wife says that this is the sort of, translating into English, it's the personification of melancholia.
Yeah. Deeply introspective and lost in herself.
Yeah, she's very sad.
Yeah.
Well, she's a sad, complicated personality.
But beautifully related picture compositionally with the figure and against, I'm not sure what it is, a drape on the wall.
That's part of a screen that's sort of...
Is it a model screen?
Sort of falling over.
And then
I take liberty, I don't know, you'll probably notice, and some of the other paintings it's more obvious, I take liberties with perspective. See, it's impossible for perspective to be as I show it, usually. There's a striking example of that in the next, further on, I think.
Well, let's move on and
well,
find
this is a small still life that's got an intimate quality, I think. And
I think that
colors are muted.
I think artists have lost touch with the beauty of simple things too, don't you? In the sense that so many are looking for grandiose, gimmicky solutions.
True, true. This painting is small, I think 12 by 16, but you could conceivably blow it up and it wouldn't lose its structure or power.
No, definitely not.
No. And this, on the other hand, is large by my standards. By the standards of contemporary painters, it's not so large.
What are the
This is 24 inches wide and 54 inches tall, I think. A little smaller than life. And this is a painting of my daughter, and I worked on it for many, many months, and it changed drastically many times.
You're tackling a difficult problem, that long, narrow, vertical canvas. Did you have any problems in doing it? It seems beautifully resolved in the final analysis here.
I had many problems with this painting, yes. But I have done many on this shape. I have many paintings that are on this proportion. And the proportion, the Is that what we say? The proportions.
Yeah, the relations.
The relations, the
Dimensions.
are a problem.
Well, it's,
That one has, I think, some muted. The one of my daughter has some very muted color and tonal relationships.
they're extremely rich and beautiful in color, and I'm sorry that we are in black and white, but I think that we can see the honesty and directness of these, as well as the compositions.
Well, now, I was speaking of perspective just a minute ago. This is a good example of what I do to perspective. If you see, the table seems at once to head into the wall, and yet somehow it works, I think. May I point?
You sure, definitely.
This picture makes the wall seem as if it's flat,
parallel,
and yet
yeah.
the table is going this way,
Yeah.
as if there were
a corner, or something.
there, and
yeah.
I think there was at one time, and I changed the whole thing. But because of the color and the way I maneuvered the objects that I painted, I think it is a good composition.
Yeah, I think it definitely is. I'm surprised to see you. These are art books and so forth, as
Yeah, well,
well as prints.
this is
or
a more exotic theme.
the Kama Sutra.
Yeah.
I saw this picture in the exhibition, the Rights of Love. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, I think it's extremely solid.
yeah.
Well
The
put
one is a
together.
book cover. The rest are just reproductions. There's a small book involved.
We're talking to Lambro Ahals, who has recently had an exhibition at the Rocco Gallery that was not reviewed, and Mr. Ahlas came all the way from Greece for the show. Lambro, we have 1 minute. Do you have any final summation you'd like to make? Any comments? Or
No, that's a picture of my daughter in a room, and I think it's a nice little composition. And comments are few because
there's no. Well, what can you say?
what
right?
can you say when the powers that be are so powerful and you are not?
In a sense, you are living in exile. I don't know if that's too dramatic a term, because it is more. It's easier to live in Greece. Is that what you were telling me
Yes,
before the show?
it's easier for me economically and physically, psychologically.
You don't have the stress of competing
Yes.
activities, and
There are other problems there, but
Yeah.
we don't have the problems that are
Yeah.
typically American.
so are you going to continue to live in Greece, or are you going to?
I plan to live in Greece and to show in New York more often